Welcome back. I'm playing Warhammer 40,000 Battlesector, and today we'll get started on discussing a Tyranid versus Necron army matchup per request of some subscribers. I saw that that was one that was voted pretty highly to have me upload a video on. It definitely is one of the hardest matchups, I would say, in the game, so I'm definitely very sympathetic for the players that are having difficulty with it. But before I get started, I'm playing around with some different microphones on some of these videos here. So let me know if you like how this audio sounds compared to how it was in the past, if it's worse, if it's too quiet, like what your thoughts are, because I definitely will be playing around, and that's one of the big things this year is I hope to get the audio quality a little bit better, because that is something that I've been getting some feedback on, that people were hoping that it could be improved. But the big thing when you're playing with the Tyranids versus the Necrons is you really have to know what map you're going to be on, and so that way you can use the map advantages to your benefit, because your build is really going to depend on the situation that you're going to be in. For example, here's an example of an army set up for an open map, but you need to realize that an open map is going to be playing to the Necrons' advantage, because that's where they want to be, is they want to have a nice open area where they can just shoot into you. And unfortunately, the big thing is there, there's going to be a really good chance that they're going to bring a bunch of living lightning units out against you, and therefore you need to make sure that you're not clumping your guys together, or you're going to be absolutely obliterated by the Immortals, the Tomb Blades, other units that have that kind of splash damage, the Annihilation Barges. All those kind of things can be a real nightmare for you. So, assuming we're doing an open map on this matchup here today, I would recommend that you bring these Tervagons. The reason for that being is they have decent armor, so they can soak up some shots. They have a decent amount of health. The big thing is every few turns they can end up spawning additional Termagants for you, so you have additional fodder to soak up shots or to hold points if you're able to capture them. They can also have more units there to soak up, or not really soak up, but stack your synapse buffs. They give you the Catalyst ability, which allows you to heal, and that'll do 50 health per turn, and it also increases the melee damage, so if you can get guys into melee damage, that'll increase their buffs. They do have a Stinger Salvo, which is a ranged attack for 2 tiles away, and that can be helpful against the low quality Necron units like the Warriors or the Tomb Guard, things like that, so you could lock them down. And then in melee, obviously, he can also do damage there and affect them. And he's also a Synapse guy, because really you need to be attacking him from range until you're able to close the distance. And so by stacking up these Synaptic Leader buffs, you can really increase the accuracy of your units while they're trying to shoot down the Necrons while you're closing the distance. So for those reasons, I recommend the Termagants as being your HQ units on these army builds here. The quintessential unit for your build, though, is going to be the Venomthropes, and the reason for that is you need to use these guys to soak up the Overwatch, because what happens, they have a decent evasion. They end up popping the Spore Cloud. That gives them 25 additional evasion, and they now get +2 ranged armor, so you can move these guys to soak up a bunch of that Overwatch shots, and they'll be able to usually tank it and survive better than any of your other units would be able to. And then you also can use this Toxic Presence, and you just put that down right in front of their units, or where you know they're going to want to be, and that'll effectively be a big damage buff for all the units that are going to then start shooting into the Necrons. You get +35 damage from both ranged and melee, and then if you have units that are going to be suffering with poison, that'll do additional poison damage to them. Not to mention that they're also pretty decent in melee themselves and have a zone of control, so that works out pretty well. And usually you want to either plop them down on a strategic point to hold it, or you end up using them just to move and soak up the Overwatch. Likewise, as the Necrons are going to want to be shooting you from range, I really like the Trigones here because they have pretty decent movement, and then they also have this Burrow ability. Now, it does pretty much guarantee that he's going to get shot up the following turn, but if you have a bunch of Necron units that are all grouped up together, then you can burrow into the middle of them, and then you'd want to use this Electric Pulse, and that'll do 30 to 40 damage to the units all running them. So effectively, you get to do a giant AoE attack with a one square around the unit here. So if there's a bunch of guys grouped together, that's what you want to do. Because the big thing with these guys is you want to do a bunch of damage to as many models as you can, and then you want to end up using units like the Prime or the Tyranid warriors to be able to run in and get the kill, and that way they can trigger their natural killer instincts, and that gives you a 75% chance to get an additional AP, because you really need to be killing as fast as possible, because if you're not taking them out, they're definitely going to take you out, because all their units are going to be very, very good against all of your guys. Likewise, while you're working on closing the gap there, by stacking up those synaptic bonuses, you should be able to at least guarantee some shots with your plasmatic buildup with the Necrons here. And now you will only have 2 times to make this work, so you'll typically want to use this to almost one-shot out a Immortal or the jetpack guys. I can't think of what their names are off the top of my head. Or if they have like a bunch of Lich Guard, something like that that's high value with multiple models, you'll want to do this attack on there. Sometimes people will use this against vehicles, and that's really not what it's meant for. Yes, you're getting plus 5% bonus damage per movement spent, but typically that's not worth it when you're using this attack against a vehicle. It's really meant to be an anti-infantry, so you want it to be one of those medium to heavy tier infantry that you would normally have trouble killing. I mean, yes, it'll one-shot like Death Marks and Warriors and all that stuff too, but most of your other units should really be able to shoot those guys down without much difficulty given the lack of armor. You typically want to use this on the higher tier units, and then likewise you could also use the targeting ability here to give you additional accuracy boosts while you're using the plasmatic buildup, waiting for it to cool down and the 2 turns to be able to use the second attack. And if you do that on 1 to 2 different squads, then that should allow you to surge and have additional attacks with these guys to be able to utilize them. Now, they can be used in melee too, but generally I don't recommend it. Really, you want to be shooting from afar and really making sure to use that plasmatic buildup to take out as many units as you can while you're doing that. And then, like I said, you can use the targeting ability to help you land those attacks, but you just have to be careful that there's not a bunch of melee units around you, because you will suffer 75% increased melee damage if you end up getting into that situation. So you just have to be a little bit careful. Likewise, I usually do bring a couple of gargoyles with me, and that's just because with their increased movement, they'll help you capture a point. But unfortunately, the Necron warriors and pretty much almost every Necron unit is immune to the blinding venom, which is one of these guys' greatest abilities here. So you effectively don't waste your time trying to use this on the Necron units, because it won't work. It's unfortunate because that minus evasion and the ranged accuracy would definitely really help you against the Necrons, but it doesn't work. You can use them being globbed together and use their swarm tactics, and they can do pretty decent damage against the Necrons, and they can, with all their movement, you can then spread them out. Because again, the big thing and why the swarm tactics can be so impossible to use against the Necrons is with all that living lightning, they'll just blow apart all your units. So you need to make sure when you're trying to get your swarm tactics bonuses to go off by blobbing everybody together, that you then unblob before the end of the turn when he's able to counterattack you. The flying ability can be quite helpful for these units here, because if there's a bunch of cover, then you can fly them to the other end of cover, and then you can just keep doing hit and run attacks with these guys, and that definitely can be a big annoyance when you're playing against the or when your Necrons playing against the Tyranid. So you can use that to your advantage. And then, like I said, the big bulk of your army is going to be these Tyranid warriors with their Death Splitters, because they have pretty decent ranged attacks here, especially when they're synapsing everybody else, and you can usually get at least a couple model kills guaranteed if you've weakened down the Necron units, and that should be enough to allow you to do double attacks with these guys. Now, unfortunately, your Necron opponent is probably going to be sniping these guys down, knowing how dangerous they are. And if you are able to get them into melee range, you know, they are even better, because now you have an armor piercing of 5 with 3 attacks here. And then if you end up stacking up your bonuses and buffs with the Tervagon here, giving them healing plus 25% extra melee damage, and you trigger the natural killer ability, and they have another 50% melee damage plus that extra AP. That can definitely be used to take down and allow you to assassinate enemy heroes, vehicles, all those kind of things that you may otherwise have difficulty killing with the Tyranid forces against the Necrons. And then with the few remaining points, I typically will use some Termagants just to, again, soak up some more Overwatch if these guys are starting to get quite weak, or if there's something like an Annihilation Barge where I don't want to risk my Venom Throps taking that hit. I would rather use something like a Termagant where I could just sacrifice the 30 points there. Now, if you're playing on a map that has more cover, then the build could be a little bit different. You could end up still using these Termagants for the same reason, but I think you could also make a argument for possibly alternating in a Hive Tyrant or even a Prime if there's a lot of cover, because these guys are very good against the Necrons. The problem is they're pretty easily sniped down by them, but if you can get these guys in cover, protect them, and then close the gap to get them into melee range, they have some decent splash damage. Each one has 2 attacks, and then it'll strike the natural killer pretty frequently, so that means you'll get 3 attacks with these guys every time you're attacking, and that'll allow you to squad wipe almost any unit that he's fighting, especially if he's getting rear attacks. Now, they may be able to resurrect, and then it may not totally be wiped, but this guy can definitely pay dividends for you, and then allow you to lock your opponents down. I typically find that the Broodlord is somebody that I never bring out against the Necrons. In fact, I think that's pretty much the only unit on the Tyranid roster that I never use against the Necrons, because he's a little more expensive. I tend not to bring out the Gene Stealers either. I mean, you could, especially if you know you're going to be able to stack up your evasion so they can survive, but I tend not to find that the Necrons are still able to kill them with their Living Lightning pretty easily, and at 65 points I find that they just can't get into combat and survive long enough for me to do the damage. So because I tend not to bring the Gene Stealers, there's really no reason for me to bring a Broodlord to try to get that evolved Brood Telepathy bonuses. And while the Paroxysm is a good ability, you have to be within 3 tiles, and it's just so hard to get them there. I just much rather have units that I can guarantee damage with the Prime, which is cheaper, or for a slight price increase, have a healer here. So I tend to never use these guys. But if, like I said, if you're playing a map with cover, again, I like to have these Venom Throps to soak up the Overwatch. But if it's a good cover map and you can keep your Acid Sprayers or your Flaming units protected, then they're quintessential units, because that's really the biggest thing that allows you to counter Necrons, is the AoE hits every model in a squad. You can just totally do full squad wipes of most units with the Tyrannifex, and near wipes with the Pyrovore, which is typically a weaker unit. The big thing with the Pyrovore is you got to just be careful, because it does explode on death, so you wouldn't want to have a bunch of your other units around him when he dies, whereas you don't have to worry about that for the Tyrannifex. Plus the Tyrannifex, if you got him into where you want him to be, you could do the adaptive targeting, and that'll make his Acid Spray even better, really allowing you to damn near wipe out anything. So again, I really like these guys on covered maps, because if you can use the protection, then you can guarantee the kills. But in tons of big open maps, these guys tend to get shot down, because Necron players will know how powerful they are. Again, keeping these guys in cover, you can then burrow into where you want to be, and then use them to attack units of opportunity. And actually, the Biovores tend to be pretty good against the Necron forces as well, because their regular attack does have an armor piercing of 4, so it does allow them to do some decent damage against medium tier infantry. And they also have a splash of 9, so they're actually pretty good at wiping out scarab swarms and things too, so that can be of benefit to you. And then you can just pop down spore mines if he has a bunch of melee units near you to force him to have to attack them. And then with the cover, again, I like Gargoyles if there's a lot of cover, because then I can move them over, get attacks, and then move them behind cover, and that way the Necron units will have trouble killing them. And if you can synapse a bunch of them using the swarm tactics, then they should do pretty decent damage. And then again, the Warriors, to be able to shoot from range and trigger as many one of those natural killers as possible, will work out to your benefit. Now, in terms of alternates, again, the Hive Tyrant, if you're going to be able to keep him alive, he can definitely do some great work for you. but typically every one of the Necron units is going to be good at sniping this guy down, so I find that he's quite hard to keep alive against Necron units, so therefore I don't use him unless I'm on a map where I know I'm going to be able to get into some position where he's not going to be taking that return fire. But he is good at attacking from range with an armor piercing of 5, and then he can set up the poison damage. And then if you get him into melee, obviously he's just a complete beast, and he does have the ability to start buffing your units if you're attacking from a large distance, and you can give him the range bonus or you can give him the melee armor piercing, but I almost never do that for this guy. I keep him in the range stance. He does have the ability to use the Psychic Screech, so if you're having issues where your opponent has an Annihilation Barge and he's just completely decimating your forces, but keeping the Annihilation Barge fully surged and doing insane amount of healing, then having an ability to be able to start taking out that momentum to lower the healing per turn could definitely be beneficial. Obviously, anytime you can give your units increased momentum, especially when they're Synapse getting a bunch of bonuses to momentum gains, this can be an incredibly powerful ability. Unfortunately, your most powerful units typically don't get a ton of the synaptic bonuses there. And then, but if you can stack up the synaptic bonuses with like the Tyranid effects and just start liquidating things, that can allow this guy to surge and do multiple attacks per turn, assuming everybody's blocked together. So that's how you'd want to do it if you're going to use these guys. Likewise, the Prime, again, if you're able to keep them into cover and then get them into melee range, if it's a lot of cover on a map, or if there's just a smaller map, then these guys can definitely pay dividends. If there's a map where you're able to keep the Hive Guard safe, these guys can actually be extremely good. I tend to never use the Shockwave Cannon because it's just too hard to get them into range to be able to shoot, but this would allow you to take out like the Annihilation Barges without issues, but then it sucks against everything else that the Necrons would be bringing, so therefore the Impaler Cannons are definitely the way to go. And once you start setting up synaptic buffs on these guys, their accuracy shoots through the roof, and then in addition to that, with the Impaler Cannon, they have the ability to ignore partial cover bonuses, which makes their accuracy even better, and therefore these guys can do damage against most unit types. If you're in a big cover map, then I tend not to bring the Exocrines because it's just too hard for them to get shots off. The Thornback is a good alternative as well. He can do really good melee damage, allowing you to take down and lock down Necron forces, and if they are grouped together, you can end up using his charge attack here, which does do very good damage. So if things are blobbed, you can just run the battering ram right through there, do a ton of damage, and then whatever he does his final attack on, it does 90 to 120 with armor piercing at 8, so that's obviously a really good ability. And obviously the Thorned armor is not nearly as important against the Necrons as it would be, say, other units, but if the Scarabs were to attack you, which would be pretty much kill themselves, or some of the other melee units, it will cause some damage reflection, but for the most part, with the Necron melee guys, they have enough armor that that really doesn't do much for damage. Again, Pyrovore is a good alternative if you're in a map that you can keep them alive, but for the most part, when I'm fighting Necrons, I find that they just focus fire this guy down and he doesn't have enough health or armor to keep himself alive. So while I tend to never bring this guy on a map, or on a match, there are certain maps where he could potentially be viable. And the Gene Stealers, like I said, I tend not to bring them, but if you're on the right map and you're a good Gene Stealer player, then you can use them. But again, to get everything to really be powerful, you need to have these guys pretty close to each other, and it's just hard to get them all in a proper position to get those bonuses without getting yourself compromised with a Living Lightning. Likewise, the Hormigons can be quite good against the Necrons, especially if you're using the Leap, because that'll allow you to effectively snipe down enemy heroes and do good damage against vehicles and the medium to heavy tier infantry, especially if you have the swarm tactics going. But again, because they need to have the swarm tactics to do all that damage, it's typically pretty easily for the Necrons just to liquidate these guys with any one of their attacks, even more so with the Living Lightning. So what I tend to do is do more termagants, because I try to do as cheap a units as possible here, and then just use the swarm tactics and use these guys just to either hold points down or to harass the Necron units and try to kill as many as you can. Plus, with all the shots that these guys have, it makes them pretty good at taking out scarabs, because most Necron players are just going to keep spamming the scarab swarm on you, so having a real cheap unit to be able to counter those scarab swarms works out pretty well for you. Alright, and then in terms of the command point abilities that you can use, what I tend to find is, again, if you're in a situation where you're fighting the super elite Necron units and you're having trouble chomping through all their armor and they're healing for too much, then using the command ability to be able to take away the momentum can be beneficial. Otherwise, what I tend to find out works real well is using the Venom Strafe, so that way you can stack up those poison damage buffs onto the Necron units, or obviously using the very powerful Spore Swarm, or whatever it's called, because that can annihilate and do good damage against vehicles and the infantry, and lock things down and force the Necrons to start shooting and wasting their AP to take those spores out. But again, they unfortunately, when they spawn in, they tend to glob up, and therefore a single unit, if they're globbed together with Living Lightning, can blow up all those spore mines. So that can be a real nightmare when that happens, if you've waited for those 3 command points and you get them to drop in the wrong area. So for that reason, unless you know they're globbing all their forces together and going to be in a good position, I tend to either use the Venom Strafe, or occasionally the Overwatch ability, or the Screeching ability to take away the momentum. And it also cancels Overwatches too, but it's typically a little bit harder for you to set that up appropriately. So I hope that gives you some idea on how to fight the Necrons with the Tyranids. Like I said, it is definitely one of the harder matchups in the game. So hopefully that will give you some assistance and give you some good ideas. Please give me some feedback on how the audio quality sounds, if you're liking how this microphone setup is currently working, or if I need to make some changes. Likewise, if you're enjoying these videos, please give my channel a like and subscribe to encourage me to post more content for you. Have a great day.